Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Homeschool Minnesota. My name is Dayle Annand. It's so good to have you guys here with us today. For those of you who can see us on YouTube, you will see that I have Amy Buchmeyer with me from HSLDA. Hi, Amy.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. I'm really
excited.
excited.
I'm excited for you to be on. First of all, before we do anything, let's talk a little bit about what is HSLDA and what is it that you all do?
Yes, so HSLDA stands for the Homeschool Legal Defense Association. For over 40 years now, we've been advocating for homeschool freedom, and we do that both kind of at a legislative level, which we'll talk about today, with monitoring bills in all 50 states, working with local state groups like Mache to make sure we're advocating for the good homeschool bills or against the bad homeschool bills, and really keeping track of what's going on nationwide and what some of the trends and themes are in that advocacy and defense of homeschool freedom. We also have a whole team of lawyers on call for our members, so if you have any questions about your homeschool paperwork or how to get started homeschooling, or if you can play sports or you name it, it's homeschool related, especially to your education. That's kind of why we're there, is to help our members navigate all those laws so that you don't have to try and figure it all out yourself. Let us help you figure it out and help you walk through any of those situations you might have with school districts. We also are available if our members ever have a truancy officer or a social worker or any other kind of government investigation. You can give us a call and we'll be on the phone and walking through that with you.
So good. Yeah, HSLDA is like the watchdog of homeschooling. And it's not just the United States, right, Amy? You guys are international as well, right?
Yes. We have relationships with homeschool groups. I mean, some like Canada actually have an HSLDA Canada, but for many, homeschooling is such a gray area. It's really the Wild West. And so we get to have help with conferences and just really coordinate vision and here's how this works.
Yeah, so good. So if you're not a member of HSLDA, you really need to be, because not only does it maintain homeschool freedoms here in our country, but around the world. And we just believe in the parental right to choose how they are going to educate their kids. And so we really want to make sure that that maintains it. And that's how HSLDA funds, is they fund through membership.
Yep.
If you're a member of Mache, you get a discount on your HSLDA membership.
Yes.
So I will put links to all of that in the description of this podcast. But today we are going to talk about Minnesota specifically. Amy is the HSLDA lawyer specifically for Minnesota and a couple other states, but for sure Minnesota. We've kept her very busy this year. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what the numbers were this year?
Yes. So across the entire House and Senate Minnesota legislature, there were 6,958 bills filed. So obviously not all of those involved education, but that was sort of just the universe of bills.
Yeah.
Of that, HSLDA flagged about 245 that we took a closer look at for if there's something education related, something perhaps CPS related, something that made us go, this could impact homeschoolers. And then of those 245, there are about 73 that we said, okay, we're going to be tracking these, following them, making sure they either don't turn into something bad or they're good and we would like to see them turn into something good. Like there was a non-refundable tax credit that didn't really go anywhere, but something like that, we're like, oh, this could be good for homeschoolers. We're just going to flag it, keep an eye on it. Yeah. And depending on how the legislative season goes, we might send out an alert to our members saying, hey, this is a great bill. Or we might just post it for now on our Legislation Action Center, which you can find at hslda.org. And you can just see all the bills that we're monitoring or watching and what our stance is on them.
That's so good. And they work with Julie from Mache. All the names.
Yes.
That's right. I'm getting straight.
No, we work with Mache on everything. So I should have flagged. Those are the members from HSLDA side. I know Mache's are similar because Mache has an amazing legislative ministry that I'm so grateful to get to work with because it makes it so much easier.
The team is wonderful. And Julie is she's incredible. And so we're grateful to HSLDA because you guys, they're reading those bills so you don't have to.
Yes.
And they're taking care of flagging all of that so you can just focus on homeschooling your kids, focus on what's for dinner tonight. And the only time you hear about it is when they're like, gosh, this is something we're going to need some help with. And then that's when we let you know. Otherwise, I mean, when you think that they had 74 bills 74?
That 73. There were
73 that they were really watching and tracking, and you only really heard about a couple of them. Mm-hmm. That's pretty good. So they were doing their job, and we're grateful to them for that because I don't want to be reading bills. That's just not my jam.
I went through law school to do that also, so you don't have to.
Exactly. And I'm so grateful.
Which is not to undermine the importance of parents flagging bills for us. I do want to say, if you see a bill and you're like, does HSLD know about this? Please send it to me because as much as I like to think I will catch it, there are quite a few times when it was a parent who caught a bill, sent it to me, and I went, oh, that's a really good point. Let me
Yeah, things
make
slip through the
sure.
cracks sometimes. So y'all have to still keep aware, but if you hear of
Mm,
something, let Mache and HSLDA know so we can take
yes.
care of that. And then we'll let you know if there's anything you need to do. So we have 3 bills we're going to talk about today.
Yes.
And as we all know, our session did not start out super fun. It was very weird this year. So tell us
Yes.
a little bit about why we're in a special session now and how, because of just the way we started.
Yes. So
Refresh our
Minnesota's
memory.
legislative year kicked off kind of strange. Several people did not show up for their positions. There was
Yeah.
some protests about how elections had started, what the results were, and then the session started. Lots of confusion. There was also just some unique balancing of power in the House and the Senate, with there being a tie. I believe it's on the House side.
Yes.
Was yes, and then the Senate having
Had
what
a
seemed like a majority, then
one
kind of
more.
dropping, and then back and forth. So
Yeah.
unique political makeup on top of unique political structure. Like, it was just one of those years where you learn a
Yeah.
lot about the legislative government because it was working like it should, but just it was working in unique ways that shows that its capacity to keep those going.
Yeah.
And so there was a delay in getting started, and there was some power sharing agreements that needed to be hashed out. And so the first few weeks, even after they finally started, was a lot of just figuring out, what does it look like when you have a tie? Who gets
Yeah.
to be in charge of this committee? Who's the
Exactly.
ranking member, and what are all those logistics look like?
Yeah. Yeah. It's just
So all of that was happening.
trying to make sure everybody's being represented is what they're trying to do. So
Yes.
we need to make sure that happens. But so we're going to talk about 3 different bills. Let's start with the first one, which was the aids to non-public schools.
Yes. So this was coming out of the budget, and so for those of you familiar with it, homeschoolers as non-public schools can access certain reimbursements from their public school, where they can say, I spent X amount on textbooks, and I would like to get it's a nominal. I mean, nominal. It's like $80. I want to say. It might be a little higher now, but not much higher than that. And so you can fill out some paperwork, and often school districts will send that out at the beginning of the year. But the governor, as part of his budget, was going to completely remove the aid to non-public schools, and less relevant to homeschoolers because we don't typically use it, but also the aid for non-public transportation. So a lot of private schools will utilize that aid to help get students bused to their schools and their programs. And so this was a bill, or at least a part of the budget bill, that was seriously going to impact private schools, and to the extent that some homeschoolers take advantage of that aid, was going to impact homeschoolers.
Yeah.
So he kind of made this announcement at the beginning of the year. This was part of his grand budget plan, what he'd like to see happening, and it became a very hotly debated, especially at the beginning of the session, part of this.
Yeah. And I mean, I know, 80, I think it's 80 to 120, depending on,
Yes.
yeah. And so, when you think about that for a family of 3, which homeschoolers easily have 3 or more kids.
Yes. I'm one of 5 and we were homeschooled. So that,
that's like $240 to $360 or more per year. And that's some curriculum. That's some budget, and so that makes a difference to a lot of families, and it is important. So whatever happened with that bill, Amy?
Yes. So the budget bill hasn't yet to be signed or passed, but they did make an announcement near the end of the session that they'd reached some compromises and conclusions. Okay. And one of the compromises that was announced was that they weren't going to they were going to fund it. They weren't going to defund it, I guess. So they are funding that still. It should still be moving forward, and that will be available. Now, I say that should with a massive asterisk because it hasn't actually been signed yet. And so if we've learned nothing from this session, it's that you should not make an announcement until we've seen it through. But it's looking like this is going to be part of the budget and just kind of business as normal.
Yeah,
as
so
far as non-public aid
you're
goes.
going to be able to go ahead and still apply for those aids if that's something that you do. Hopefully. Now once the governor signs it, then we'll know for sure. Yay, celebration. But until then, anything's possible.
Yes.
Okay,
but
so
right now it is looking that way.
Yeah. So then going into, let's take the other one that was a little more, we're getting away from the budget. I probably should have started with this one, but the immunization, where they had required that all students, no exemptions for the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine. So can you talk a little bit about that one?
So there were actually 2 bills introduced, one on the House side, one on the Senate side. House was House File 3239. Senate side was Senate File 3439. And just like you said, it removed the conscientious objection from those vaccines. Yeah. And so what that resulted in was, if you have a doctor or a medical exemption, a doctor saying, no, for the health of this child, they can't get it, then you wouldn't have to. But that would be it. And it is really, really difficult to get a medical exemption. Those are not handed out lightly. And so you have either a very serious medical condition or you get the vaccines. And the nice thing about Minnesota's current conscientious objection is that it is actually pretty well designed and allows parents to go on a vaccine by vaccine basis and say, this is yes, this no. in communication with their medical providers and in making those evaluations. This removes that opportunity for them to make those decisions for their kids and the best fit for their families.
Yeah.
And so it was obviously came up with a lot of concern, especially for homeschoolers, because you're submitting all that data to the public school district.
Yes. Yes.
I've got my own soapbox I'll happily get on about why this is actually a really bad use of very private and personal documents and why we should be doing it differently. The short version is homeschoolers would have had to get their students vaccinated if this had passed, and then submit proof of that when they first started homeschooling and when their child hit 7th grade. Thankfully, neither bill moved out of committee, so they're both, we're saying dead for now.
Yay.
I believe we can probably confidently say these ones are dead. The only asterisk I would throw up here is that they could technically take that bill language and stick it in another bill.
Yeah.
I don't think that's going to happen at this stage. My sense is that they're really looking at finishing up the debates they've already had, not kind of inserting that into a larger. So what could happen, I think we can pretty confidently say the MMR vaccine exemption is staying for this year.
Yep. So again, nothing changes for you if you're if you file an exemption, you're good. You don't have to worry about the MMR vaccine, which is a blessing for those of you who are trying to think about the way you vaccinate your children or not vaccinate your children. Yes. Again, a parental right to decide.
And each person is going to determine that based on their faith, positions and journey, their medical history. Like there's so many factors that go into this. So we appreciate having that space for parents to make that evaluation.
Yeah, parents don't take that lightly. They don't take not vaccinating their child lightly. They think it through. They research it. They look at their conscience and what they're feeling, and they go with that. And as a parent, that is your right to do for your child. So nothing changes there so far. But like Amy said, anything can happen. It can be tacked onto a bill at the very end. We don't know. But for now, it looks like that that's not going to happen.
If the budget, I'm putting like maybe a comma at the end of it, I'd put like a period. We'll make an exclamation mark once the special session is.
Exactly. So we're hoping, guys. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so then the other one, the one that caused a lot of like, what's going on? So first, let's talk a little bit about, if we can, Amy, just kind of the background of MSHE, HSLDA, and the Minnesota Department of Education.
Yes.
Can we talk about that real quick before we move into what this bill said?
Yes, I think that's really important background here. It was about 2 years ago, I want to say 2023, where there was an education policy bill that would have required homeschoolers to submit test scores as part of a bunch of other provisions, but that was the part that impacted homeschoolers. Homeschool community just came out in droves and reached out to their legislators and showed up to the committee hearing and were respectful but very firm with, there's no reason for us to have to submit these test scores. We've never done that in our history. We do the assessments, it's part of our requirements, but there's no point here. And so it actually ended up getting removed from the bill. It was a huge victory, a really just rewarding thing coming out of 2023. It had originated with the Department of Education. So they reached out to MSHE and HSLDA and said, we don't want to be fighting against the homeschoolers here. We would like to be able to kind of reach a conclusion. But we do think that homeschools are kind of undefined. They're kind of this non-public school. What does that mean? We want to have more clarity here. So we're going to have meetings and start talking through what that looks like. In those meetings, they had invited, like I said, MSHE, HSLDA, some of the non-public school representatives, and then the Coalition for Responsible Home Education. So they are an organization of formerly homeschooled students who have issues with their homeschool experience. They want to see homeschooling heavily regulated, and when you look at some of their policies, it really aims towards restricting the rights of parents to homeschool and putting a lot more authority in the hands of the state, just with everything. So they were at the meeting as well with the Department of Education. And so it kicked off and the department said, we would like to see a definition of homeschooling. We want to see some restrictions put in place. And so about the last 2 years, we've been meeting every few months in this committee and discussing, here's one way you could do it, here's another way, with lots of tweaking. To be fair, I'm not a support of the definition as it currently stands in that committee. And I still don't think, and I believe I speak for MSHE as well, that Minnesota's definition needs changing. I think that the homeschooling actually, it works. I would love to see certain things like the immunization requirement taken off, but if we're talking about the core of what does it mean to homeschool in Minnesota, we don't need to further narrow it and define it.
No.
And that's kind of what this committee's been trying to figure out how to do.
Sure.
But to be fair, the department was at least listening.
Yeah.
So we come up on this legislative session and we hear from the department that they said, okay, we know this definition is half-baked. We're not going to be introducing any legislation this year. So the session starts off with all the craziness like we discussed, and the education policy bills get introduced. There's no reference to homeschooling that's going to impact our definition on both the House and the Senate side. It moves forward through all the layers of committee hearings and testimony, et cetera, et cetera. And we're watching, but there, again, nothing
Thought
specific.
We were in the clear.
Exactly. In fact,
Thought
we kind
we were
of
in the clear.
okay, made it through this year. Well, then at the very last part of this on the Senate side, the Senate Policy Bill 1740, the SF 1740, was being read, and someone issued an amendment and said, I would like to add this amendment that would basically define homeschooling. And some of the language they used is straight out of the committee definition that we've been describing. A lot of it wasn't, or I should say a lot of it had been kind of worked in a way that we would not have agreed with and didn't like.
Right.
And basically it was language that had not gone through the homeschoolers. It hadn't gotten our approval. We had no part in this language or definition or discussion. And because it was amended onto the bill on the Senate side after all the committee hearings, there was no opportunities for homeschoolers to weigh in. We just added on. So
they were strategic in their timing.
Yes, there was. They learned, and I'm not going to be like they as in Department of Education.
We don't know who they were.
Nope,
they were strategic in their timing, whoever they were. But they said that it wasn't them. So we have, we believe that.
Yes, I do think the department was operating in good faith here, and were surprised as well to see this.
They were surprised, yes.
So what is in the bill? The bill had three main components that really were concerning to us as the homeschool community, especially HSLD and Mache kind of flagged. The first is that it really narrowly defines what a homeschool is. So the bill says that a homeschool are students related by a parent. What that immediately does is say, okay, for your homeschool to meet the definition, your students ought to have one parent that they are related to, which immediately kicks out step parents. It kicks, depending which variation of that, but you can't really homeschool step siblings, definitely not cousins. There are situations, where you might homeschool your neighbor, or you might potentially be like a foster parent. Like there are lots of different categories you can look at depending on where the authority lies, that this would have immediately said that's not homeschool.
Homeschool families are diverse.
Yes.
And made up of a lot of different ways, and we need to remember that.
It's just, this is modern society. So it's like a very old-fashioned view of what like
very old-fashioned
homeschool looks like.
Yes.
So that was kind of problem number one, which is right off the bat, this definition is very narrow. Yeah. The second big problem then that we immediately had with the definition is that it defines a homeschool as having a primary residence in Minnesota. Now, what I think they were trying to do was eliminate use of programs like Liberty Online and some of those private school, but that you can use as homeschool curriculum in your home, because I know that it had come up as something that the Department of Education didn't love because they didn't like that it was very hard to regulate, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I think that's what they're trying to do. What the language actually did was not prevent you from using that, because parents still get to pick curriculum and parents still get to kind of take the lead on that. But it says that we're using the word primary as a residence means that the majority of the education has to happen in a location. That's your primary location.
Which is crazy, because that's not how homeschoolers go.
Exactly. And so you're kind of getting this really like false view of homeschooling as something that happens at the kitchen table.
Yeah.
When in reality, homeschooling happens
everywhere.
In the museum, at grandma's house, on the farm. Like, it is such a varied, and that's part of what makes it so successful.
Yes.
Is that you can have real life experience and have all those opportunities and classes and courses, and you're not just limited to being in one physical location.
Exactly.
So that was kind of our second concern with the way this had been worded. The third, though, and I'd say one of the more massive problems with this definition, was that it created a category of offenses that if you had a misdemeanor, felony, or Alford's plea, you just could not homeschool. And it wasn't just of you, it was any adult in your home. So anyone 18 or up who had any of these crimes in your home could not homeschool. Yeah. So right off the bat, I just want to flag, I said misdemeanor, felony, and Alford's plea. The Alford's plea is less well known, but that's what happens when you're charged with a crime and you say, I'm going to maintain my innocence, but for whatever reason, I'm not fighting this. Yeah. It could be you don't have the resources to fight it. It could be you are just saying, like, I don't have the ability to. Whatever the case might be, the central part
I don't have the proof of my innocence, but I did not do this. Yeah.
So you are not saying you are guilty. No court is finding you guilty, but you're accepting the consequences.
Right.
Now, there are lots of questions we could ask about why that's in our criminal justice system, why that's something we need. I'm happy to go on a long rant about that too. But for this context here, I just want to flag that those were the three categories. And then there was the list of crimes.
Yes.
Now, the list of crimes included some really terrible ones. I don't want to downplay.
No, absolutely not. And we would be concerned about them as well. Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
No, so it's very serious crimes. A lot of them involving children, some not involving children. Some are like arson or carjacking or things that don't seem to have as clear a correlation. Drive-by shootings, if you were convicted of that, you wouldn't be able to homeschool or have anyone in your home who had that. But what we were particularly concerned about, there's a couple factors. Yeah. One being, this was an across-the-board prohibition. It didn't matter if It happened when you were 18, and now you're 42 and have been a squeaky clean adult your
And
entire life.
that's the thing. How many times do we know people who, when they were really young and stupid,
Yes.
they did stupid things? I think of my friends at Teen Challenge who
Yes.
were just involved in things that they now would never do, and they become upstanding
Yes.
citizens with families, and it would prohibit a lot of them from
Yep.
homeschooling their children, even though for 15, 20 years their life has been very, you would never know unless you talk to them that they've been through what
Yes.
they've been through.
So
They're
this is
upstanding
saying,
members of community.
yes,
Yeah,
because of that thing you did, you are just categorically incapable of this.
you can't do it.
Or flip it a little bit, an 18-year-old son goes off, does something really stupid, sets fire to the barn, whatever, gets charged with arson because he's an adult living in your home. Now you can't homeschool any of your kids.
Yep, they all have
Like
to go
there's
back to
just
school.
was an extreme lack of nuance in this placing it there that there was no discussion or debate on. So there was no way to actually say, hey, let's rethink how we're designing this. So that was kind of problem one. Absolutely no wiggle room, grace, way to get an exception to this.
No appealing process
No
of any
appeal.
kind.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
The second kind of big problem with this was that it was done within the compulsory school attendance language. So instead of going to the criminal code and amending kind of where these laws are and kind of where you list the penalties and consequences,
Right.
it was all happening over here in the homeschool statute. So we're now putting criminal penalties or results of criminal, convictions in a totally different section of the law. Not unheard of, but if you want to have an actual nuanced discussion about the penalties and all the consequences of being made a felon or having a misdemeanor,
Right.
that really should happen over in that section of the law.
Yeah.
And the upside of putting it over in when you're getting actual consequences for your actions is that it can become more discretionary. A judge gets to say, because of this heinous crime that you were just convicted of, we are removing your capacity to ever homeschool your kids or live in a home where people are homeschooling. I honestly don't have much problem if we have that kind of tailoring.
Yeah.
Where I'd say, if a judge is putting this in your conviction and you've gone through the process, okay, that is fair. But because that's an individual with individual circumstances going through the criminal conviction process.
Yep.
Not something over here on the homeschool law where we're just saying, all of you, we're not going to look at any nuance. We're just going to assume you're all such horrendous people. You're capable of teaching your child to garden and to read them books at night, but don't you dare teach them math.
Yeah.
Across the board prohibition. Nope.
They can live with you all summer long. They can spend the night there all weekend. They can do all the holidays with you, but you can't educate them.
Yes, like it's a weird way to draw the line. Yeah. And that I would say is the third kind of thing I'd highlight is if we have actual concerns that these children aren't safe in their homes, then we should take it seriously.
Absolutely, we would not want that.
Yes.
Yes.
But that if people are convicted of crimes of that magnitude, their children are almost always taken away.
Yep.
Like that is just already part of the system and the laws we have in place.
Yes.
So this doesn't actually add another layer of protection for children. It doesn't add another layer of kind of catching these things. It's just saying, we're just going to do this and put this prohibition in place. And even though the defenders who we were concerned about, we have things in place ready to watch those kids.
Right.
We're not going to worry about that. We're just going to assume all of you are the consequences. So that is the third kind of problem here is that a lot of these are very serious crimes. We take them seriously, but we already have ways to protect children and remove them from homes when those have been convicted or those people have experienced that.
Right. And the fact is that, like I said, we aren't doing that with public school families, private school families, micro school families.
Nope.
None of that.
Go to a public school.
Yeah.
Take their online classes entirely and it not be a problem.
And
it's
it wouldn't be a problem.
Yeah. Or
exactly.
Whatever.
Yeah. You could completely do online school through a public school and it would be no issue.
Mm-hmm.
But if you decide to do BJU Press, that's a problem. And so it's very arbitrary and not a good law, honestly.
Very
and like Amy says, we are 100% at Mache and at HSLDA. We want children's safety as a priority to us. We would want kids to be safely homeschooled. We would want them to be in a safe home. That is paramount to anything. However, this is not the way to do it.
No.
Yeah.
And part of the problem is that there was no opportunity to speak into that. There was no space for homeschoolers to express. This is not nuanced. It's really broad. It's in the wrong section of the law. It's any of that.
Well, if they're going to make a law that's going to affect the lives of 31,000 children in our state, which that's how many homeschooling kids there are, don't you think that the families that are taking on that responsibility have a right, as in a representative government, that with people that they've elected to represent their needs and their interests, They have a right to come ahead and testify as to what that would do to affect their family. And that is the primary reason why it's
Yeah.
just such a bad law, is that we didn't even get to speak into it.
Mm-hmm.
31,000
Yeah, it
children.
was.
Yeah, and all those families, that's all just kind of thrown off to the side like it's no big deal. And it
Yeah.
is. That's a
And when
lot
this
of
was
kids.
amended in the Senate, it is. When it was amended, or when it was added into this bill in the Senate, Bill, a sponsor, was like, we have to just stop this gap in our laws. There's this that all these other states, people from Wisconsin and South Dakota and North Dakota, I'm being a little facetious, but it was basically like murderers are sneaking into our state to homeschool because we have this hole in our laws, which just as a starting point, and as the staff attorney for many of those states,
Yeah.
there is nothing like this, even in Wisconsin or Illinois or Michigan or South Dakota or North Dakota or any of those Midwest states. Ohio, none of those states have language like this. So it's first off just an egregious to say that they don't have these supposed loophole.
Yeah.
It's part of the authority we say if you are qualified to maintain guardianship and custody and all of that of your child, we're trusting you to care for your child's best interest.
Right. Right. And if
So that's kind of also
if
a
we
mixture
can't
of that.
trust you, we have a whole system that will work through that with social services and
Yes.
CPS, and so there
Another-
is a system in place.
Another line I heard, and this was more inclined for why it has to be the primary residence in Minnesota, was, well, we don't want people buying a cabin in Minnesota, living in Wisconsin, and coming across to homeschool. And I want to say with all respect, nobody wants to do that. Wisconsin is such a better state to homeschool. South Dakota is such a better state to homeschool.
Nobody's coming to Minnesota to homeschool their kid.
Exactly. So I don't want to be like, Minnesota's homeschool law's terrible, because I like, no.
No.
But I do want to say it's a lot better in other states as far as the less paperwork you have to file, less government involvement. Like, it's not something you're like, I just really want to have to test my child every year. Let me head over there and do that.
I would love to file all that paperwork.
Yes. I don't get enough interaction with my district. I want to give them my immunization information.
Nobody's saying that. We're doing it because it's the law and we want to obey the law, but
Yes.
we're not doing it because it feels great.
Yes.
And our kids love to be tested, and we love to walk through that with them every year.
Yes.
So where does that stand, Amy? This law, and all that being said, where are we on this?
So it was amended, passed the Senate, moved over to the House. The House had their own education policy bill. Like I said, they've been working through. Homeschoolers were amazing. They started calling their House representatives members and just saying, no, we don't want this definition. For all these reasons, it's really problematic. And to give them credit, the House, I think, listened and was very mindful of the homeschoolers reaching out. And so they had some other concerns with the Senate policy bill. It's a huge bill. Like, we've got this portion that we're like, this is a problem.
Yeah.
I'm sure the House had problems with other parts of it.
Sure.
So when the Senate education policy bill came over, what they did is they completely deleted all the content from it, including that homeschool language, and then put their House language from their bill that was into that. So it's now still Senate File 1740, but it contains all this House language that had not previously been in there. That then was voted on, approved, passed out of the House of Representatives. Goes back over to the Senate. Shockingly, the Senate was not like, oh, you're right, this is great, we're just going to accept it completely. So they said, no, we're not going to accept these changes. And at that point, it went over to the conference committee, which is all this is pretty standard procedure for how these things go normally. Except that it went over to the conference committee on, I should have written down the date. It was basically the legislature had to end because of, the way their legislative cycle runs on a Monday.
Yes, the 20th.
Yes, the 20th of May, thank you. 15th, this goes to conference committee. Now, there is a world where this could have been wrapped up really fast and moved on. There was talk already, consensus, it's sort of the politicking that happens. But returning to that budget we mentioned earlier, the budget hadn't been completely concluded. There were some concerns with where that was at. And so the session ended and there was no resolution on the budget, on this education policy bill, on their finance bill, a bunch of other things like that. So what happens next is that the governor needs to call a special session because in order to keep funding going for another year and kind of under the requirements of Minnesota law, they need to pass this biennial budget by July. Mm-hmm. The budget hasn't been passed yet, so the governor needs to call a special session to get this resolved. He has not done that yet. From what we can tell, it's because there still isn't consensus, and he wants to actually have consensus before calling the special session and moving it forward. When that special session gets called, that's when we're going to see this education policy bill, including, maybe not, the homeschool language, move forward. So in the meantime, they have these working groups, a K through 12 education working group happening, which are a little bit bigger than the conference committee. More people are involved, and they're reviewing all the bills that didn't make it through that had education components, so not just the policy bill. But that group has been reviewing it. They did release some of the language that they're looking at, and the policy language they're looking at does not include the homeschool language. So right now, we are tentatively declaring victory. I think we can, because it's not there. Now, even more so, I know I said like an asterisk with the budget, an asterisk, but this is the one where really it would be easy to put the homeschool language back in, because we're still in that informal negotiation type thing. I don't have a sense that is the appetite here. I really do think it'll stay out, because the homeschoolers have been so vocal, have been so engaged on this, and been very clear. But it's not done until the governor signs it. So that is why we're still watching it very carefully and asking people to pray, and we're just praying for those working group members that they would continue to keep that language out of the bill.
Okay,
but
so
until the special session, that's where we're at.
We don't know. So is there anything that homeschooling families can do besides like pray? Obviously, we always tell you to pray. But is there something that they can do also? Like, should they be calling? Should they be writing? Should they be visiting? Should they be...
It's a good question. If one of your legislators is part of the working group, and there's a whole list, you can find them on Michelle has put it out, HSLDA has posted it on our Legislation Action Center as well.
Yeah, we'll put a link.
Yes, we'll put a link, perfect. Just to see, are any of these your representatives? Because they're part of this working group, they should want to hear from anybody in Minnesota, but just facts being what it is, if you live in their district, you're going to have an extra kind of importance to them. They're going to want to hear from people who elected them, which makes sense. They're supposed to be representing you. So especially then, I think it's worth sending a note, reaching out, just saying, and very respectfully, we're not trying to harass them, we're not trying to be jerks, just say, hey, we saw that the language had been removed, we just want to continue supporting this, and just remind you that homeschoolers really don't need these things mended. I mean, you can find on the Michelle, in the link we'll post, all of our arguments for why this is problematic, why we don't think it's a good fit. And it could be lengthy, you could give a whole policy reason, or just a note or two saying, hey, thank you for being my representative. Thank you for being on this working group. Just a heads up, I'm aware that this language passed the Senate, did not pass the House. We prefer the House's version. We don't want this passed.
Yeah.
Something that kind of simple and kind can really go a long way.
Yeah, very kind. We don't want to be angry. Yes. We don't want to be belligerent.
No.
We just, like my mom used to say, you catch more flies with honey than you do with vinegar.
Yes.
So that's what we want to do. Well, Amy, my goodness, you've been busy.
It has been quite an adventure. And thankfully, I'm not the attorney for Illinois, but for those who are watching Illinois, by the time this video posts, because tomorrow's the 31st, and that's when their legislative session ends, so we are declaring soft victory right now. As soon as we hit June 1st, it'll be a very loud victory. And because Illinois had an even worse homeschool bill, really bad, we changed a lot of their requirements and laws, and that was just been a really grueling fight. So just to pass on the encouragement, Illinois appears to have not passed that this year. And again, completely because of the homeschool community coming out. It was thanks to Republican and Democrats coming out and saying this is bad for my constituents. And that I think is really crucial. This is not a political party issue. This is not a one side or the other. This is a parent issue and us making the best decision for our kids. So just because your elected official happens to vote differently than you, I still encourage you to reach out to them, build that relationship, once the session ends, so you can get coffee with them, bring your kids by. Those are the moments when you really start cementing our offense and our defense for future bills like this.
Democrats and Republicans all homeschool their kids.
Yes.
Let's remember, it's not just one-sided.
Coming out of COVID especially, we've seen just an amazing number. We have all kinds of tax brackets homeschooling, all kinds of minorities homeschooling, all kinds of, you name it, they're homeschooling.
More diverse than ever. And it's wonderful to see. Yeah.
It is beautiful. And that's why we want to preserve that flexibility and freedom. Because we just want to fight. I mean, even though our name is Minnesota Association of Christian Home Educators, we just want to fight for the right to homeschool for all parents. Yes.
They have a right to do it. Yep. And I know that's HSLDA's vision too, is that, we aren't too concerned about why you're doing it. We just want you to be able to do it.
Yes.
So, yeah.
We want to empower you to provide that great education for your child.
That's exactly
you uniquely can't provide.
Yeah. Well, Amy, thank you so much for all you do and how you serve homeschool families and how we can call on you all the time and you're there and you answer your phone, which is baffling to me.
Well, thank you for having me. And truly, it's an honor. I was super blessed to grow up homeschooled. I love that I get to work with homeschool parents, and I love that I get to advocate for this, good homeschool freedom.
Well, you're a good advocate. We're so thankful. Thank you for all the meetings that you've done behind the scenes and all the bills that you've read and flagged, and the way that you keep us all just like between you and Julie, man, that's what keeps us going, because otherwise it would be just a labyrinth of like things would slip through the cracks, and then we would find ourselves in a very different situation. So we appreciate you, Amy. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I just want to echo again how much I appreciate Mache. They're a wonderful state group to work with. I 100% encourage everyone to make sure they're joining as members to support them and taking advantage of all the resources, because you are just a great resource for Minnesota homeschoolers.
Thank you so much, Amy. We appreciate you. And you
Thank
guys,
you.
again, everything's in the description of this podcast. Go ahead and grab it. Get involved, stay involved, sign up for legislative updates. If you're not a member of HSLDA or Mache, there'll be information in the description of this podcast on how you can do that. It's super important that you look at that. And thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.